Pyramid of abstraction is something someone described to me when I was in grad school that I've absolutely fallen in love with as a way of describing this. And the pyramid of abstraction says that if you you build a big foundation of concrete language, then as you add things that are more abstract, and abstractions we'll talk about, but as you add things that are more abstract, you will hold the reader in the scene because you will feel, they'll be like, oh, this is this character thinking about this, and this is part of their experience, rather than feeling, oh, now the narrator, the writer, has decided to give me all this information. And so your goal is like this concrete language is going to get its hooks in people, and it's going to hold them there. The issue is, a lot of times, these two fight with each other. Okay? And I'll talk about why that is. And so your balancing factor is, when you add concreteness, you are often adding words. If you can find a way to do it without adding words, you should almost always absolutely do it, because it's going to make your writing that much more evocative, that much more powerful, and it's going to help with your foundation of keeping people in the scene without the abstractions popping them out. Let's talk about what an abstraction and what something concrete is. Those of you who've taken the class, you sit this one out. All right? I'm going to list some things at you, and I want you to tell me how concrete on a scale of this is absolutely concrete and this is absolutely abstract. All right? We'll start with love.
Abstract.
Love! It's what brings us together. Okay. What about a dog?
Concrete.
And there's the hook. How concrete is the word a dog?
He's got 4 legs. It's probably hair.
Yeah. How many of you in here thought of the same thing when I said a dog? Probably almost every one of you imagined a different dog. Okay? And in a lot of ways, we talked about love. Almost all of you probably imagined the exact same thing. So in some sort of description of it, you could say that the word a dog and the word love, that dog is the abstract one and love is the concrete one. Not necessarily, because I honestly think that both of them are kind of a little bit in the middle. But love is probably going to be a little higher, because you actually have to try to describe what love feels like. You're going to have to go into abstract language, which is the issue. Describing what a dog is actually pretty easy to pull it down on the scale of concreteness. How can we do this? Color, size. Yeah, we can start describing the dog. And each word we add on top of this, word, is going to pull it down. Can you see why? Brevity and concreteness, therefore, sometimes fight with each other. It's really easy to get very concrete with lots of words. Your goal then as a writer is to come up with fewer words, the right words, in order to describe this dog in a way that cements someone into the scene and does more than one thing. You want to describe this dog in a way that sets tone, that maybe says something about the character seeing the dog, and that also makes it concrete. This is what I talk about by doing more than one thing. If you can come up with a sentence that describes that dog, that does all 3 of these things, then even though you're adding words, because you're making this one sentence do so much heavy lifting, you are pulling it down on the scale of concreteness, you are giving us information about the character, setting the tone, and maybe even you can often give us some setting in this one sentence description of a dog that'll tell us, that'll do some of your info dump work. By setting, I mean, some of your world building in your description of the dog. So this is what we're looking to do. Now, people ask me, I got this question on Twitter yesterday, how do I build my vocabulary? This is a scary question for a writing professor. Why is that so scary for a writing professor?
You gotta build it, so does your reader.
Yeah, exactly. People who are reading, who ask that question, almost invariably are saying, I want to go memorize longer, cooler words. That is the wrong way to approach description. Okay? What you want to be able to do is learn the right word. And having a slightly larger vocabulary will help you find that right word. But really you want to choose a precise word. For instance, let's talk about precision. Let's say a wooden bed. All right? How can you make, without adding any words, the phrase wooden bed or into something more concrete? An oak bed. Okay? I would even say a log bed does a better job. Why? Because log bed, if you've got a log bed in there, it's starting to do some of this. Now we're in a lodge or something, right? Now you've expanded your vocabulary into words that you already know. That's the sort of way you should be looking to use your thesaurus. Bringing something down a step on the pyramid of abstraction by changing one word. This is what makes description work.
Wouldn't it help too if you were to change bed into some other word that's also...
It depends. If it really is just a bed, then it should just be a bed. Now, if you're walking to this room and you can find something to describe other than the bed that's going to give a better evocation, a tone, character, or setting, then perhaps that's the thing to describe instead. One thing to keep in mind with description is when we're talking about this big long block of text. Let's say there are two reasons people tend to put in big long blocks of text. One is big description of setting. They walk in a room and you want to give us this huge, enormous description of this awesome room. Okay, that gets old really fast. The other reason they do it is to give a whole bunch of world building. He was a knight of this order who believed in these fundamentals and, and so speaking, that's why the gods fell and now, that's the other reason that we get these big, long paragraphs. Well, the first one, the description, you can actually, if you can do some of these heavy lifting sentences, which we'll talk about, we'll try and build one here, but if you can do some of these heavy lifting sentences, then you can shrink that whole paragraph down by giving us the tone. When you say that there's a four-post bed in a room, we're setting the rest of the scenery. You often don't, if you can say, you describe this bed and say, it was trimmed with lace, it was 4 posts, and it was made of fine oak. You can pretty much start to extrapolate the rest of that room. It's a rich, lavish room. You don't have to then go on and tell us how rich and lavish this room is if you can describe one thing. If you walk in the door and sitting right here is a pure gold wine carafe. Is that how you say that? Yeah, wine pitcher. There's a pure gold wine pitcher sitting on a marble stand with fine, fine mahogany trim. You can kind of fill in the rest of the scene. You know what type of house you're in. Whereas instead, if you walk in the door and you see bullet holes in the window and the light is flickering, and you describe those two things, you're gonna have a different view of this room, and so it's not gonna be all the way down here, but it's gonna be down far enough that for most cases, your mood has been set, what type of house building it is has been set, and so you can give a couple of these really concrete sentences, these really concrete descriptions, and set your tone and your mood and your character. So let's talk about the dog. Let's try and do, now this is going to add words, okay? So we're going to add words. We're in a fantasy book walking along and we see a dog. How can we describe this dog? Well, what are some of the things we can do to make it more concrete and to try and evoke character or evoke setting?
Injured.
Okay, having the dog be injured kind of sets a mood, doesn't it? It's whimpering. If you describe it as a dog that had not yet been caught and eaten, what does that say?
Who's predators?
Yeah, if it's in a city or something, that says something, right? A dog that has not yet been captured and eaten. You probably do not want to say a breed in the fantasy novel. In the science fiction novel, you can say the breed because it'll be make it an earth breed. So you can then do this whole thing, but sometimes you can't move it, into the breed without kind of breaking. Yeah. What were you gonna say? What's that? Yeah, golden retriever. Mentioning the breed can do that, but you can say things like call it a wolfhound or call it a bird dog or some of these things that usually in fantasy you want to try and stay away when you can from using the terms that overtly come from our world. The thing is, almost all the terms do secretly, and so you're going to have to decide where your balance is here. But, calling something an ottoman instead of a footstool is probably a bad idea in a fantasy book, simply because the Ottoman Empire didn't exist, and a lot of people know the word Ottoman as relating to the Ottoman Empire. That said, you can make an argument for saying, well, the whole book is in translation anyway, and so the person who translated English just called it an Ottoman because that's what we do. But you kind of have to watch this balance. So how else can we describe this dog? How can we evoke character in our description of this dog?
Give it a sneer.
Oh, what's that?
If you give it some sort of expression like a
sneer. A sneer, a snarling dog. Now, how can I evoke the character of the person who's seeing the dog?
Their reaction to seeing it.
Okay. Yeah, a mongrel. You use the word mongrel, and that does something different. Or, a disgusting dog, or, a cute dog can give you. What else? Like, can we think of a way to evoke some of our world building with this? What's that?
Maybe a fine hound.
Yeah, a fine hunting hound. If your character walks along, we're back on the character. When the character walks along and says, wow, that looks like a really well-bred, trained, fine hunting hound. Who would lose one of those? In that sentence, suddenly we're talking about our character as they know about hunting or things like this.
On the other hand, if you see a dog that kind of looks like a cow, it's probably a more lower class or poorer setting.
Okay, looks like a cow? What do you mean?
Dogs, when they have a lot of litters, they start to get the little udder.
Oh, okay.
You don't see them in the States because we don't have those kinds of dogs.
Okay, yeah.
Dog with a pound tag put in its ear or something like that.
Okay, yeah.
Pound puts tags in
Yeah.
its ears. That's weird.
Yep.
What's going on?
Yeah.
It's got armor on.
It's got armor on. If there's armor on, no, that could be, if it's appropriate in your world and you can pass a war dog, that says so much, Yeah. So this is what we're looking to do with your descriptions, all right? We don't have a lot of time left on this, but you want to be doing these things. Now, the other thing to keep in mind is the multiple senses. The multiple senses do a lot of work bringing us down here because they happen so infrequently in a lot of writing descriptions. And so if the dog is whimpering and they catch a whiff of how terrible it smells, the wet hair smell, then that is going to be several times more concrete than the equal description used as is just a sight description, whatever you call it. Yeah, if it looked injured, it looked wet. If you smell it being wet, that's going to do more heavy lifting than saying it looked wet. Okay? And so what these things are doing is you give us a couple of these sentences, these really powerfully descriptive sentences. You toss away the rest of this descriptive paragraph, and then you keep on going with your dialogue, and in between in your dialogue, you can start throwing in more and more of the sort of world-building things that you wanted, because you've really cemented people into this world with the whole concept of pyramid abstraction, which really does work. People are in there. They're with you. They're following along. They're like, yeah, this world is cool. And, oh, that little tidbit is awesome. Make them relevant. Save the irrelevant ones for later. But start working them into the dialogue or descriptions, and you'll suddenly start seeing, if you imagine you've got three sentences for a description. We'll get to you. And you're going to do these three sentences. And the first one is this wonderfully, descriptive, concrete thing that evokes something about the character here, and then after it you mention something about setting. It had been years since he'd been hunting with his father, hunting the drakes that clustered around the cliffs outside of town. Some sort of world-building thing that's basically purely world-building setting info dump sentence, but if it relates to kind of this, concrete thing, and then you immediately follow it up with some sort of more concrete thing, you can see how couching that in there keeps the reader in, builds your world, and does it in a really engaging way, as opposed to 2 lines of dialogue and then 8 sentences of reminiscing about the character's past with their father might do. You know what I'm saying here? Hopefully this is getting across to you. And this is the second big thing, kind of mixed with the third thing, that those editors are going to look for on your first page. They're going to look for you doing this kind of heavy lifting with your sentences. They're going to be looking for concrete language. They're going to be looking for it to evoke character. And we didn't get to the character part of it very much yet, and we'll do that. But we do have to stop for writing groups, but the idea that you look through the lenses of the character's eyes, and as was mentioned here, I'll just throw this out here, and then we'll talk about it more next week. You know, the character who is a soldier might notice the fortifications of the town, whereas the character who is a scholar might notice, you know, that those fortifications were built upon old fortifications from this culture that fell long ago. And noticing those two sentences, one says, wow, those fortifications could hold off and repel, one man could repel 10, with the other person saying, wow, those fortifications are built on the ruins of this ancient civilization. Suddenly, you've done a description, both of get across there's a walled city, but one gives you the historian character and one gives you the soldier character. And when you kind of move your descriptions that way, even in a third person limited, you can get some of that first person power of voice just in how they see things.